outdrive you.
She can outdrive you. The reason why is because she's my grandma. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pernesglio Show, and we've got a great guest this week. Not a driver, but the other end of racing television. Of course, you all remember Thursday Night Thunder, which appeared on ESPN for so many years, and God, you've produced so many other racing shows. Ken Martin, ladies and gentlemen, joins us, and Ken, thank you for coming on the show. You look great.
Oh, thanks, Derek. It's great to be here, and over the years, you and I have enjoyed bench racing, talking about the sport that we love so much a lot, and so I'm just looking forward to being with you today.
You know, just to give the listeners a little background, like we used to work together at NASCAR Media Group, or NASCAR Productions as it's called now. One of the things that I would tell everybody that I would enjoy is in the middle of the day, if I saw you sitting in your office, I would duck in there and we would just sit and bench race and talk about all the days gone by, which is exactly what we're going to do right now.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, just some cameras rolling.
Yeah, you know, the last couple of years, I continue to work for NASCAR, and I'm working from home. So I miss people dropping by the office, and, you know, I miss those interactions, and especially with you, because your history is so deep and rich, and you remember a lot of the programs that I was involved with back, you know, in the 90s, and yeah, so it's always a pleasure to speak with you.
That's the other thing too, that I think that people who are listening or seeing you on here as a guest are wondering who this guy is. But you produced Thursday Night Thunder. You were the director for the Fast Masters when it was around back in the day. I mean, how many other Cup races did you produce, and all that over the years?
I was in the broadcast booth for over 500 live TV broadcasts. It may have been for ESPN or CBS or ABC. I worked 18 Indianapolis 500s for the IMS radio network or for ABC, and just about any time in the 80s or 90s when you saw Bob Jenkins on, I was at his side. I was his researcher, booth producer, and then I also had the opportunity to produce some documentaries in 1998. When it was NASCAR's 50th anniversary, I produced the 5-hour documentary that aired on ESPN called The 50. And at that time, it was the largest documentary project that ESPN had ever done.
I remember that.
And for me, it was the opportunity of a lifetime to visit and tell the stories and go to the homes of all of my heroes. And so somebody said, I think Dick Berggren said, that show was like a love letter to NASCAR. And I said, in some ways it was. And, you know, but I've been so blessed. You know, there are 58 people in the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and I have met and or interviewed 55 of them. So I've had the opportunity to see my heroes race from the time that I was a young kid up until I've really spent the last 40 years in TV production in one form or another, whether it was as a freelancer for ESPN, or 19 years in Indianapolis working for Lingner Group Productions, or the last 14 years working for NASCAR Productions in Charlotte.
Now, let's start off actually right from the beginning, because I remember sitting down in your office at NASCAR Productions, and you had that black and white picture of you as a little kid in that black and white striped outfit, and then right next to that picture was the outfit that was encased in glass that you wore as a little kid. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah. When I was born, my dad worked for a company called Wynn's Friction Proofing. And so he would go to the races and put decals on the race cars, but also he would do like victory lane presentations to the race winner. So I've got pictures of my dad with Fireball Roberts or Bob Welburn or different people like that.
Wow.
And I would tag along with him to the races. And my mom made me a checkered flag shirt that I would wear as a 4-year-old. And then fast forward like 40 years later, I was working in Indianapolis for Lingner Group, and we got a bunch of old footage from Winston, and they wanted us to look through it to see if it was of value, what was in it. And so I was watching, and it was a convertible race from Martinsville in 1956. And I said, I remember being at this race, and they were showing, the old black and white footage of the race, and I saw the Wood brothers. They were all in a white uniforms with number 21 on the back, and I remember those. And then all of a sudden, the camera guy does a cutaway, and it's me and my mom sitting on the hood of our 56 Chevy station wagon watching the race.
Wow!
And the next
in your outfit,
in my outfit, with this checkered flag shirt on, and the next shot is ISO of me waving a checkered flag, wearing that checkered flag shirt. So immediately I'm hyperventilating. I'm like, that's me. I never knew that they took this film of me, but some filmmaker had seen me at Martinsville in the infield and had shot this video, and it stayed, in storage for more than 40 years, and then it ended up in my hands in Indianapolis.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah. So, sometimes we need a aha moment, or I'm in the right place moment, and I'm like, yeah, that tells me I was in the right place. So, as a kid, I'd go with my dad and mom and sister to the races. My dad also promoted a little short track in Virginia called the Lynchburg Speedway. It was a quarter-mile asphalt track, and we had a lot of the local heroes from Virginia that would race there, like Curtis Turner, Glenn Wood, Wendell Scott, and I got to see Wendell and all of these guys race when I was 6, 7, 8 years old.
Wow.
And so my dad, because of his wins connection and the track connection, was familiar with the drivers. And so, as I said, I would just tag along, and I fell in love with the sport at that point. And in 1958, we knew that it was going to be the last race on the beach at Daytona. And my dad wanted us to be there to experience that. So I was not quite 6 years old, but we went to Daytona, and I got to see the cars race on the beach.
Was that your one and only time going there?
That was the only time going to a beach race.
Okay.
That was my only time going to a beach race. And it happened to be the last one that was won by Paul Goldsmith driving for Smokey Yunick. And
how much of a memory do you have of that, though? Is it just scattered visions, or is it something vivid?
It's pretty vivid because, the beach, the sand, the blue sky, these loud cars rumbling down the beach, and I loved, my mom says some of my first words were like hot rod, and I loved cars. So, I remember the colors. I remember how many people there were there. I remember the fact that we always had to be aware of the tides coming in and out. And I remember watching National Guardsmen there helping people dig out of the sand to get their cars that were buried by the tide coming in. So yeah, I have pretty good memories of that. But also I remember, kind of hearing that this was the last beach race. And as we left Daytona and we went up 92, we saw the location where the ground was being cleared to build the Daytona Speedway. And so when we were there that February, they had sort of a groundbreaking ceremony that would be, a year from then would be the first Daytona 500 run on the high banks.
It was an old airfield, right?
Yep.
Okay.
It was the airport was there, and it was it was a lot of old it was just sort of swampy, murky land, and I remember the dirt was sort of black. It was sort of blackish gray. It wasn't like red mud like we have.
Right, I know what you mean.
Here.
I've been there.
And
yeah.
And it was sandy, and there were lots of roots and things there. But they had already started the grading of the land. There were no banks or anything up yet, but they had started to clear the land where the track would be built. And so, yeah, I had a chance to see that.
Looking back now and seeing the multi-billion-dollar facility that it is, and seeing what you have seen, what goes through your mind knowing that you saw it when it was an empty field?
Yeah, it is amazing, and it tells me what a visionary Bill France was. And I did an interview once with Reverend Hal Marchman, who would always say the invocation before the start of the races and all. And Hal told me about a trip that he took with Bill to fly over to Talladega, where they were going to build the track. And Reverend Marchman said, all I saw was trees. Bill saw a racetrack. He saw what could be built there. And so when you think about the Daytona International Speedway, and you think about all of the years of Bill France's experience that led to that, of when he was a teenager and he grew up in Washington, D.C., he would go to the board tracks in Laurel, Maryland. And those board tracks had a 35, 40-degree banking.
Right.
And that's where Bill France said, bank tracks, and he put that away in his memory. And then when he went to Langhorne for the first time, and we know Langhorne was a circle.
Big circle.
Big circle. Mm-hmm. And he noticed that the fans sitting in the stands could see the cars coming at them and see the cars going away from them. Mm-hmm. And he said that is a good experience of watching the cars from that perspective. So when he built Daytona, he put in a tri-oval so that you'd see the cars coming at you and going away from you. So yeah, all of the things that Bill learned through his life, he put into the Daytona International Speedway. But being down there for the 500 and seeing the Daytona Rising project and seeing escalators and chandeliers and,
a bar.
I mean, every comfort of any modern facility is there available now. And to think back on, the first Daytona 500, it was just like bleachers you'd see at a high school football game, basically.
Right. And the wall was one Armco rail.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I wasn't there, but I remember seeing it in video.
You see those video of like when Lee Petty and Johnny Beauchamp go over the rail, you realize, how far we've come as far as safety and construction and just what we know.
Now, at the time when you had gone down for the beach race at Daytona, was that as big as what the Daytona 500 is now?
Well, it was a huge event, mm-hmm. but I would say, and it drew people from all over the Southeast. We lived in Virginia, and we were certainly aware of it, and so it drew fans from all over. But, one of the problems that Bill France had, that one of the reasons why he really needed to build a speedway was to control the crowd. Because, the south turn of the beach, Bill France did not own that property or control that property at the south turn. So the man that owned that property put up a grandstand for people to watch the races, and Bill really couldn't do anything about it.
He couldn't control the ticket sales.
He couldn't control that ticket sale. And then, how the course went 2 miles down A1A, 2 miles up the beach. But all along A1A, it was like open mangrove fields. It wasn't fenced. It wasn't secure. So Bill France would put signs up out in that area saying danger snakes,
right? Rattlesnakes,
danger poisonous
that.
snakes,
Yep.
and all. But he was doing that to try to get people to discourage them from just entering there.
And watching a free race.
Yeah.
Right.
And I do remember being in what we'd call the pit area now. There was nothing separating the pit area from the track along the beach. And Ned,
I thought the pits were on the beach.
Yeah, they are. So I mean, they're on the beach. So the people standing there, if you wanted to, you could walk out onto the track. I mean, you'd be foolish to do it.
Right.
But Ned Jarrett told me the story once of he crashed on the south end of the beach and turned over.
I know the story.
Yeah, and the lady
he woke up.
Yeah, the lady woke up and she wants to give him some liquor.
Early time liquor.
Yeah.
I remember the interview. He was out cold, and he says, I woke up in the lap of this really big fat woman who was trying to feed me early time liquor.
yeah, and he said I knew I was going to die, and he said I didn't want to go to heaven with liquor on my breath, so I didn't take it. But yeah, that's just how. But there was the big grandstand at the north turn, and that was a stand that would probably hold 8,000 to 10,000 people there. And then other people could enter and sort of go what we would call the infield. But again, if you look at some of the footage of those beach races, there are people standing
right there. I know.
Right there. It's almost like some of the rally and off-road races that we see of, people are leaning in to look at the car, and it's like,
wiping their faces that goes by.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a big event, and it certainly was well known. And because of the success of the event, Bill had gotten Hudson and other auto manufacturers involved, but it was sort of like the 10 years that they raced, what we'd call Cup on the beach. He knew that he needed a permanent facility, and as that area of the Ponce Inlet grew, they were building more and more houses. It was tougher to get the permits, and basically. And that's one of the reasons why when the cars did their time trials on the beach, it was a straight line run down the beach because they didn't want to shut down A1A for the time trials.
Oh, really?
So,
okay.
Yep, if you go back and look, the time trials for those races was straight line. It was a 1 mile measured run that they would do. And so that way they could keep A1A open until like Friday, and then they would run the modified sportsman and the cup race, but they would do that, and you've probably seen stories, seen pictures, like they did the inspection of the cars at a drive-in movie theater that was a mile or two up A1A, and so the competitors literally would drive from the beach and road course area up to this drive-in movie theater. NASCAR would do their inspections there, and then they'd get back on the road and go down to the beach.
Wow.
So, that, I mean, again,
such a different time.
Yeah,
right?
It was such a different time, and it was exciting, and as I said, as a kid, this was my world in Technicolor. I mean, to see these cars and to see these drivers and to see being there on the beach. I'm still a producer. I still like to think of TV shows, but I'm like a 10-part series about the beach races could just be magic. It would take a lot of money to produce, but a lot of
footage to find.
Yeah. You think about the characters of start with Red Byron and Raymond Parks, and then you go to Fireball Roberts and Tim Flock and Fonnie Flock and Paul Goldsmith and Smokey Yunick.
Henry C. was another popular one, right?
Yeah. I mean, you think about these characters, and I think done right, it could be a knockout. But as I said, it would take a lot of money, and it's sort of a pipe dream of mine that someday, some series could be done just about those years on the beach. Yeah.
And Lord knows there's platforms out there for it now.
Yeah.
So let's change gears a little bit and talk about your stuff, your origins. How do you go from an area of Virginia, which is a rural area of Virginia, to the NASCAR world, and then eventually out to the Midwest to Indy, to the IndyCar stuff and the sprint cars and open wheel midgets. How did all of that come together?
It was really the matter of meeting the right person at the right time.
Did you had always want to do television?
Back when I was 13 or 14, I went with my parents to a race at Rockingham, and it happened to be a race that ABC Wide World of Sports was recording. And so I remember I told my mom and dad, I said, I want to go down and talk to this camera guy who was like in turn 4 outside the fence. But, this is like an hour or two before the race was starting. So he was just there at his camera position. And I went down there and I talked to him and I said, how do you get a job like this? And he told me, he said, I go all over the world for ABC Wide World of Sports. And I'm like, are you a race fan? And he's like, no, I'm a cameraman and I cover the event that they tell me. And I said, you make a living doing this? And he's like, oh yeah. And that sort of set a little, the
spark
thought in my mind of, maybe that's a possibility. Although, it was just a teenage dream that, that maybe this could happen. But I went to college. I graduated with a degree in history, planning to be a history teacher. Was married, and my love for the sport was always there. I continued to go to the races at Darlington, Charlotte, Martinsville.
While you were a history teacher?
Yeah.
So you were actually a school history teacher?
Yeah.
What grade?
It was 8th and 9th grades, and it was back at my alma mater, Brookville High School in Lynchburg, Virginia. And after a year or so of being there as a student teacher and everything, I determined that, with a wife and a child, I wasn't going to make enough money to support them, so I went to work for Nationwide Insurance as an agent for 5 years. But I worked until I was 30 years old, and on my 30th birthday, I'm like, I'm not doing what I want to do. And I had a hardware store that I owned and an agent for Nationwide Insurance. And I said, I'm going to try something different. And so ESPN had just started producing NASCAR Cup races. And I watched a couple of their earliest broadcasts, and I said, these guys, they need some help. They don't know very much about NASCAR. So I called Bristol, Connecticut, and I said, who's in charge of your NASCAR TV productions? And they said, Terry Lingner. And I said, could I have Terry's address? And so I sat down and wrote about a 3-page letter to Terry telling him, here's some things going on the broadcast that maybe you haven't noticed or maybe you didn't know about, and here's some information that could help. And so I sent the letter, and a week later, Terry is on the phone calling me, and he said, I read your letter and I really like some of your suggestions. And he said, we're going to be doing the Cup race over in Richmond, Virginia in a couple of weeks. Why don't you come over and meet me? So I went over on...
What year was this?
This was 1982.
Oh, wow. Okay.
1982, 40 years ago. Wow. So I went over to Richmond, and on that Saturday, I met with Terry, and I took him a lot of my old programs and pictures and things like that, and I said, here's kind of my background. But I went over there with no thought of, I'm going to have a job or anything. I just wanted to go share with Terry. So Terry's like, I tell you what, tomorrow I want you to go up to the broadcast booth with Bob Jenkins and Larry Newber, and I want you to write them notes during the race of what you're seeing, what we're doing. And he said, I want you on the headsets with me, and I want you to tell me things that you're seeing that we're not covering, that would do better. Mm-hmm. So,
which is what the broadcast spotters are doing now.
Yeah. And so, the next day I'm standing there in the broadcast booth. The ESPN music is on. Here's Bob and Larry, and I'm like, holy cow! How did I get here? How did this happen? But I said, if this is my opportunity, I'm gonna kill it. I'm gonna do as best as I possibly can. So immediately I started firing off index cards and notes to Bob and Larry. And also I was charting pit stops and things like that. And you have to remember, there was no electronic scoring, there was no electronic timing. Everything was done manually. And so I was charting pit stops. And then later on in the race, I gave a note to Larry. I said, Bobby Allison's going to win this race because he's on this different pit strategy. And here's when Bobby pitted. Here's when Tim Richmond pitted. Here's when Dale Earnhardt pitted. And I said, Bobby's going to do this. And Larry looks at me like, and this is like with 100 laps to go. And Larry goes on the air and says, hey, we've been working on pit strategy, and Bobby Allison wins the race. So immediately,
you're the hero.
Yeah, I'm the hero. And Bob and Larry were just such great guys. I mean, they really were. And after the race, we went down to the TV compound, and and they told Terry, we've got to have this guy. He belongs with us, and he can be a huge help. So Terry's like, hey, 2 weeks we're going to North Wilkesboro. Can you be there? And I'm like, yeah. And so for the next 10 years, I was on every ESPN broadcast, whether it was Busch Series or Modifieds or Cup or whatever, working with Bob and Larry and the other talent that would be in the booth. But so I did that for 7 years as a freelancer. During the week, I worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep for Abbott Labs, and I would fly to the races on the weekend. But Terry made it, he said, stick with me and I'll make it worth your while. And so he got me, I was the associate producer of the broadcast and did all of the research and all of this. But then in 1989, Terry makes the decision that he's going to leave ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut to form Lingner Group Productions. And so Terry got in touch with me, and he was like, would you consider moving to Indianapolis? And I said, what do you want me to do? I said, what's my job? And Terry's like, you just tell me what you want to do, and we'll work it out. And so
you realize you're talking about opportunities that almost never happen nowadays.
No,
yeah.
I mean, I talk about right place, right time, blessed, all of this, but it all was incredible how this fell into place. Mm-hmm. And so when Terry left ESPN, he left with the contract to produce Speed Week. He left with the contract to produce Thursday Night Thunder. He left with the deal to do Indy 500 qualifying. And so he left with sort of a bank that would sustain his business while he got it off the ground.
Yeah, I mean, look at that lineup. Speed Week. I mean, that was one of the original racing shows, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, just a set was the pit wall, two guys reading highlights and what happened. And they need shows like that again.
Yeah.
They really do. They need shows like that again, which run the gamut from Formula One to go-karts, and shows you a variety of racing.
Yeah, I mean, and if people only knew all that went on behind the scenes to put that show together, we had stringers or camera guys all over the country. Mm-hmm. We might call Tim DeRoyne up in New Hampshire to get us highlights of the modified race. And then we might call, Greg Stevens to get World of Outlaws stuff. And we had a network of shooters all over the country. But, this was the days before satellites and fiber and all of this stuff. So, I mean, we lived waiting for FedEx deliveries, UPS deliveries to bring us these tapes. And, and we're taping on Thursday afternoon, and we're sitting there Thursday morning waiting. Waiting. And
chomping at your fingernails.
Yeah.
I remember that when I worked on race day on TNN. There was some mornings that someone would come running down the hallway with the highlight, and here you go, put it in. Put it in the tape machine.
That's the way it was. And one of my jobs, I would go down every Thursday morning to the Indianapolis newsstand and get National Speed Sport news, to make sure that we hadn't missed a story, because we knew Chris and Speed Sport News would cover the stories. Yeah. So we would get Speed Sport News just to make sure, we didn't know that this happened here or this happened there. And so,
that was, for all intents and purposes, that was like the Bible of racing, or the New York Times of racing, I guess you could say. Chris had something at the beginning.
Whether it was international or national, or whether it was the smallest short track or the biggest super speedway, Chris had people writing stories about all of those things. So we would wait for those tapes to come in, write the show. Greg Oldham was one of the producers. Jenny Nickel was a producer. Paul Pistol was a producer. Terry sort of oversaw it, and we would put that show together for ESPN, and it was the way for everybody to learn about what was going on in the world of racing, and it wasn't just focused on NASCAR. I mean, it was everything. Everything.
That's what we used to love. I mean, because I remember like one year we would sit through a whole 30-minute episode just to see that last 30 seconds of highlights from the World Series at Thompson, because my old man's car was in the field. You know, like it was huge.
I mean, that was it. We had hydroplane racing, and I mean anything that was motorized, we would cover on Speed Week. So, for me, who grew up around stock car racing, but I loved every form of motorsports. And I had gone to Indianapolis in 1970 when I was a senior in high school to watch the Indy 500. So for me, that just broadened my horizons to learn about every form of motorsport. And I've found out how much each sport kind of has in common, and it's still about the people, the personalities.
What are some of those things they have in common?
Well, I mean, it's a passion for speed. It's a passion for creativity. It's a passion for, competition. They want to, a racer's mentality is they want to beat everybody else. No matter what the game is, they want to win. But they, mechanical things. But I think it was in a lot of ways in those days, racers had sort of a blank sheet of paper, and they could operate with their ingenuity. And for me, as a kid that grew up working at my dad's gas station and things, I never was a great mechanical mind, but I could see, why this car was better than another. And all of a sudden, a car would show up like the Munchkin. And, and all of a sudden you're like, he thought completely different.
Outside the box.
He thought outside the box of everybody else. And I mean, that was,
I came up a little bit in that era. I was very young at the time, but that was one of the things that I thought was so cool, is that you had to build your own car. Yeah. So it wasn't like you can order a chassis from the chassis shop and, have it delivered and bolt on your stuff and go racing. Yeah. Like, you had to build your own stuff, which was cool because you got to see who the artists were. Yeah. Because there were some guys that could build beautiful stuff, and you look at it and you're like, wow. And then you look at someone else a couple of pits down and it's like, they're not that good of a fabricator.
Yeah.
But it was cool to see because you tried everything. I mean, my old man was a prime example of that. He didn't have a lot of money. He took a Mazda rotary and put it in a Midget. Like, he used to rebuild the motor for $600 every other season, but that's what he had to go midget racing with, and that's what they did.
Yeah, and I think that creativity as fans, as people around the sport, it just captures our imagination of what if, and how sharp these men and women were around these cars. Of, they didn't come with an engineering degree, but they came with an engineering degree of hard knocks and trial and error, and working in their shops and not afraid to get their hands greasy. And I was talking to someone the other day. It was amazing how many people you'd meet back in racing who would have a finger missing or a thumb missing or something, because they then,
little accident in the shop.
A little accident in the shop. Oh, I just cut the tip of my finger off. Sew it on, and I'll keep going. I mean, that was just the way things were back then. So I think that that was a golden era. And I was so blessed to come along in that period of time. And then with the Thursday Night Thunder, all of a sudden a new world opened up for open wheel racers.
Right. Because
it had gotten to the point where it was impossible for open wheel racers to go run at Indy. Right. That world had sort of split.
That was ride buying before ride buying was commonplace.
Yeah. And it was really expensive, but here was Thunder live on ESPN on a Thursday night, and it attracted racers from all over the country. I heard your interview with Mike Bliss talking about, he came from Oregon to Indy to race on Thunder. Randy Tolsma came from Idaho to race on Thunder. John Bickford knew about Thunder in California, and that's one of the reasons why Jeff moved there. And so you think about, we had this great core group of Indiana, Ohio racers, and then we were bringing in people from all over the country, and some of the Indiana guys became heroes, like, Ryan Newman and Tony Stewart. But then we had Jeff Gordon and Mike Bliss and Tolsma. And
then what I thought was cool is that you would get guys from like my area of the country. So you would see someone like a Drew Finoro show up, or you would see Noki Finoro, or who I used to love was Bob Ciccone. He was a character on the show. Oh my God. Bob Ciccone was so perfect for Thursday Night Thunder, was he not?
Yeah. I mean, the
bald guy with a hair product sponsor.
And part of the magic of Thunder was that it was short heat races, then go to an interview with Dave Despain, then another heat race and somebody else with Dave Despain. And with that format, all of the guys got to take their helmet off and walk over and talk to Dave and be a personality.
And get FaceTime.
And Dave was brilliant at bringing out those stories. I mean, because Dave was a kindred spirit. He loved, those stories. And so Thunder was a great match of racing and ingenuity and people from all over the country, and then being able to show their personality. And you had Gary and Larry up in the booth, and Larry Rice was so good at what he did and such a great man. And Gary Lee, was always the straight man, and he could, describe the action. But, through the years, a lot of different people rotated through there. Bob Jenkins would work up there some nights when
I remember.
It depended on where the cup race was and whether he had to be gone to the cup race. Steve Chassie, Steve Butler, Larry Newber, who I mentioned, Larry would be there. But it was and part of the magic of Thunder, I was thinking about it today, was that most all of the crew and everything was from the Indianapolis area, the TV crew.
Right.
And so budget-wise, we could do a one-day set and shoot, which you understand. It's like we could come in at lunchtime, set up the cameras, set up the booth, set up the lighting, race at 8 o'clock. When the race is over, tear down, go home.
And sleep in your own bed at night.
Yep. And so from a budget standpoint, it was a great thing because everybody, like you said, slept in their own beds at night. And then a lot of that crew would leave on Friday morning to go do a cup race or a kart race or whatever. But we had the best of the best camera people, audio people, technical people. A lot of our staff from Lingner Group would be producing, directing, graphics. And so, but every Thursday night was just like a homecoming. And the spirit, the camaraderie of that crew, I think showed up in the broadcast.
Absolutely.
And the thing that,
the fun showed up in it too.
Yeah.
I mean, there were so many fun things that you guys would do on camera. God, Bob Ciccone making jokes. There was one guy that would come on, would wear the Halloween mask.
Yeah.
I forgot who it was.
Kevin Olson would get on and try to sell used light bulbs.
Yeah, he used to sell that. He used to tell people he was a light bulb repairman. Right?
Yeah.
And he would say, just completely straight faced.
Yeah.
Not even crack a smile or start to laugh or anything.
Yeah.
And he would sell it. It was so funny. And what was it like? Did you know moving to Indiana, you were going there to start this midget racing show, or what was it that they came to you and they said, we're going to start doing live midget races on a Thursday night? What did you start thinking?
Yeah, I mean, that was a big part of it, and Speed Week was a big part of it, but also a lot of us at Lingner Group were working on the NASCAR broadcast. So I was sort of, during the week, I was a Lingner Group employee. On the weekends, I was an ESPN employee. And so I would work and still do the stats and research and associate produce for the ESPN Cup broadcast. But also, we got the deal at Lingner Group to produce the Cup banquet. So all of the Cup banquets that you saw from the Waldorf were produced by Lingner Group. Mm-hmm. So that turned into a year-long project because we would have highlights from every week, and we would do specialty shots at every track to prepare for the banquet. So that turned into a year-long project that we would do.
I know. I think in later years, myself, Chris Stevens, Brad Morgan, we ended up producing those Cup banquet videos after the NASCAR got the deal for them. And I can say firsthand, because I've been down in the trenches, you're walking in the studio at 9 a.m., you're leaving at 2 a.m. That was the banquet video time of the year for a producer was a grind.
Yeah, it really was. And for all of the top 10 drivers, but then the Rookie of the Year, and then the A.E. Clevite Engine Builder of the Year.
All the little specialty videos.
All of those specialty things. And then we would do like what we call the track owner and operators video of we would have every track president that we would shoot footage of and build all of these elaborate videos. So it was a year-long project that you couldn't just pick up in November and say, hey, let's get ready to do the banquet. We built...
It was an all-year
thing. We built what is clip reels, and like, okay, here's Dale Earnhardt's clip reel, starting at Daytona, then Rockingham, Richmond, and we would add footage to each of those clip reels. Yeah. But, of course, back then, the editing was machine to machine and not at all
it's not what it is now.
Not
no
at all.
File sharing or anything like that. File sharing was here. Take this tape.
Yeah,
right?
And so Terry continued to add different projects. Then we needed something to do in the winter, so he got the U.S. Pro Ski Tour, and some of our folks would take off and go for the ski tour, and we may have done Scholastic Sports America, or the World Rowing Championships when they were in Indianapolis. We produced that. So gymnastics and track and field, and so there were a lot of different projects like that, but also ESPN was really trying to develop the NASCAR property, and so they wanted us to do videos for them of, a 1 hour special of here's, the 10 greatest drivers or the 10 greatest moments or the 10 greatest tracks. And so that kind of fell to me to write and produce those shows.
Because you were the historian?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that was sort of my thing. And I love to write in Bob Jenkins' voice. I knew his delivery style. I knew what he enjoyed doing, and so I loved to write in Bob's voice. So that was part of me building my niche of what to do, while still going on the weekends. And Bob had an office there with us, and you think of Lingner Group as this massive group of people. In reality, it was about 20 people at its height, but every one of those people were capable of doing 2 or 3 or 4 jobs, and every one of them was passionate about racing. And it's amazing when you go around the world of motorsports today how many of those people that started at Lingner Group are still involved in production and racing. And and then I got to mention Mike Wells. Mike was the godfather of directing races, and Mike was there at the foundation of what was Sport of Indiana that became Lingner Group. And Mike, built the template, and no one deserves more credit for bringing racing into people's living rooms than Mike Wells. And the combination of Mike Wells, Terry Lingner, Gary Clem.
Yeah, those, and I have gotten to work with Mike Wells and Gary Clem, and I consider it an honor. I really do, because these are guys that are legends in this type of broadcast sports.
Yeah,
it really is cool. What do you think? Some of the things. Do you think some of the broadcasts nowadays are missing that, because it's. Now you've got people producing it that are from NFL, baseball, just all different sports, backgrounds. What do you think the broadcasts nowadays are missing, or some of the things that we should be looking at?
Yeah, one thing that I always think about, and a guy that I'm, really think the world of, is Roger Vincent. And Roger worked with us at Lingner Group.
I worked with Roger before on the Truck Series.
Yeah,
great guy.
Yeah. And the thing of it is, Roger was a race fan first. Roger sat in grandstands and watched races. And Roger knew, when I'm sitting at the grandstand, I want to see wider shots. I want to see this. I want to see that. And it's not so much about the art of cutting a lap, 20 times with 20 different camera angles. It's about following the action. It's about following the battles. And I just think that because that has been lost in some of the broadcast, it's impossible for the play-by-play announcers to call play-by-play. Mm-hmm. Because you can't call play-by-play when the camera is cutting 15 times a lap, because you
got to talk about what's on the screen.
Yeah, got to talk about what's on the screen. That is better than anyone. And so I think that's part of it. And I know a lot of the folks on the Fox and NBC broadcast crews are huge race fans, but I know that their passion may have been an acquired passion after they were given the assignment of following the sport. And I used to, say, how many of you all have ever bought a ticket to sit in the grandstand to go to a race?
Which is something that really eats away at me, because there's a lot of times where I'm looking at an event and I know that I would have been really good for.
Yeah.
That I think that I could have been better on pit road, but
yeah,
it's like, you look at some of these reporters sometimes, and it's like, have you ever sat on the back of your dad's pickup truck while they're rolling the car off the trailer and you're watching everything going on? Or have you ever sat in the grandstands all night? And it's some of them. Are you doing it because you want to be on TV or because you like racing?
Yeah, and I think sometimes that passion or lack of passion shows through. And I know, again, we're in such a different world than I was 40 years ago when I started. When I at ESPN back then, we would go to North Wilkesboro with 4 up cameras. We'd have 2 on the roof, 1 in turn 1, 1 inside turn 3, and 1 handheld in the pits. We would cover a race with 5 cameras, and we would cover the race with Bob and Larry or Bob and Benny or whoever in the booth. I would be in the booth doing stats and research, and one other person, Lynn Jeffers, would be the stage manager. And that's it. And now I look at the booth, and there's like 40 people up there and a dozen computer screens. And believe me, I would have killed for computer scoring back in the day. I'd have killed for some of that. Yeah. But that's just part of it. And so sometimes, a smaller group can be more passionate about it than when you feel like you're part of 100 versus the part of, we'd do North Wilkesboro with maybe 30 people on the crew, and that those 30 people would go to Benny Parsons' home place for a picnic, and those 40 people, would know each other by name, right. Know their kids, know their families, right. and
now they go back to their hotel and they find a local restaurant, eat, and go back to their room, and that's it. I know.
Yeah, and we were fortunate, so fortunate in that we had great, I'll call them talent. Bob, Ned, Benny, whether it was Jerry Punch or John Kernan or whoever, those guys were always part of the crew. They did not stand alone. They, and Benny was the best at, if you were a cable puller, Benny would know your name,
right.
And he would know where you're from, and he would talk to you the same as he would if Bill French Jr. walked in,
right.
And so that was part of it, and I think that a lot of it comes from the top down, and again, I can't say enough about Terry Lingner, of what a great person he was, of he taught us to do everything, and whether it was sweeping up the floors in the building or emptying the trash in the bathroom or producing an Emmy-winning feature, we stayed humble. We stayed true to our upbringing, and a lot of that was just Terry being Terry, because there was not a job that he wouldn't do. He would do everything. I remember, we're out at IRP getting ready to do Fast Masters, and I'm sweating bullets, and Terry's out driving the sweeper truck, clean, because he said the track needed cleaning, so there's Terry out there, and that's just the kind of man he is, and talking about meeting the right person at the right time. Meeting Terry 40 years ago changed my life, my family's life forever. And he opened the doors for me to allow me to use what talent I had in a positive way.
Well, look at just look at the talent you got to work with too. For all intents and purposes, you got to work with every great that came along in motorsports, but like Bob Jenkins is one of them. Tell us about Bob Jenkins. He passed away recently, but he was in American motorsports just right up there with Mike Joy and Chris Economaki. He was a benchmark.
Yeah, he was, and I was given the privilege of speaking at Bob's memorial service. And one of the things that I talked about with Bob was he made everybody around him better, and the chemistry that he had with Ned and Benny was as genuine could be. And Bob was always about making them the stars, but Bob knew how to take over a broadcast when the time came, and Bob could just do a couple little gestures. Ned and Benny knew, okay, we're going to sit out and we're going to let Bob call this, and we're going to and Bob loved to call a race. That was his nature of calling a race, of building excitement, of painting a picture.
And he could, as they say in TV, guide the ship.
Yeah, exactly. And sadly, in some events, we had some tragedies occur.
I remember. I watched them live.
Yep. And Bob was always great at bringing down the tone and the tenor, and you could tell in Bob's voice when J.D. McDuffie had his crash at Watkins Glen. You could tell, Bob was reining in the broadcast of saying, we're going to just sit here for a minute. We're just going to think for a minute. We're going to wait and see what the results are. But, like I said, sadly, several ARCA broadcasts. We were broadcasting at Atlanta when the accident occurred on pit road. Wow. Just, those are times, though, that the genuine care and concern of the broadcasters would show through. Mm-hmm. People knew that, that when they put the brakes on the broadcast, that this is not a time for jokes. This is not a time for levity. This is a time because we knew that in some instances, this driver's wife may be sitting at home watching this broadcast. I mean, it wasn't back in that era. Not every wife came to the track. Not every family came to the track. I mean, there were people sitting at home watching this on TV. And, and it was sort of like, I remember reading about Jim McKay talking about the Munich Olympics, where, he said, I'm going to be the one delivering the news that these hostages have been killed.
I've seen the footage.
Yeah.
When he said they're gone.
They're gone. Yeah. And Jim knew that, that this is, I'm speaking to a mother. I'm speaking to a spouse. I'm speaking to a child. And so, again, Bob was so good at that. But guiding the ship, he did great homework. He did great research, and he knew the strengths of everybody on the crew, and another thing, Bob was very producible. I know. To the public, it's like somebody that will follow direction and will if the producer is saying, we're going to cover this now, Bob would understand or trust the producer to know, okay, we need to follow this story, or we need to get down to Jerry Punch in the pits because of this going on. But, Bob's thing was, I'm a race fan that got lucky. And Bob loved open wheel racing. He loved the Indy 500, and he loved all forms of motorsports because, as host of Speed Week, every week you trusted Bob to tell you what's going on in the world. But to see him go from being a host on Speed Week to calling play-by-play on the weekend, those are two different skills, two different skills. Mm-hmm. But Bob was a great guy. I considered him a great friend. It was Bob's friendship and Bob's stamp of approval on me of saying, I want this guy with me, that carried me. Like I said, I did 500 live broadcasts. Right. And, and I got a chance to work with Mike Joy and Ken Squire and Chris Economaki and, all of those people, I admire, I respect, and again, I'm like, what is a kid like me doing in the broadcast booth with Chris Economaki? And then later on, when we did NASCAR's 50th anniversary, I went up to his house in New Jersey and spent 2 days with him doing interviews for NASCAR's 50th anniversary. So, I don't know. I mean, my story is almost too good to be true. And if I hadn't lived it, I wouldn't
That's
believe.
exactly why we wanted you on as a guest, because
Yeah.
you have those stories. You talked about those bad parts of the racing broadcast where someone got hurt or killed. One of the early ones that I remember was when Rich Vogler got killed at Salem. You were there that night. Tell us what happened.
I'll actually tell you, I was not there. I was in I was in Pocono, and Bob and I were in Pocono for the race the next day.
Which he was supposed to make his first Cup start.
Right.
Okay.
He was. And so Bob and I had gone to dinner, and then we went back to our separate rooms, and we're going to watch Thunder. So Jeff Gordon had been beating Vogler, and all of a sudden at Salem, Rich was beating the snot out of Jeff. He
was fast that night.
He was really, really fast, and he had nearly lapped the field, and coming with one lap to go, he has the trouble, crashes, fatality, and so immediately Bob is knocking on my door saying, "Are you watching this?" And I'm like, oh yeah. And so I went into Bob's room, and then Terry Lingner was on site there with Greg Oldham producing the show. So Bob, we wait until they go off the air, and Bob calls Terry, and he's like, what happened? And, and Terry talks about how things happen sometime. When Vogler's crash happened,
because there's no footage of it. It was just because he was so far out, like people wanted to see what happened and they couldn't. All they saw was him coming off the wall.
Yeah.
And I was young at the time, but I saw the shot, and when the car came to a rest, I saw the helmet rolling, and when I saw the helmet rolling on the track, I was like, this is not good.
Yeah. Yep. And we had a tape producer that when he rewound the tape, he erased it. And so unless you were at home recording it on a VHS,
right,
there is no footage of that crash. And Terry said, there was sort of God's way of saying, we don't need to see this. Wow. We don't need to see this. And so, we're all huge Vogler fans. I mean, we love Jeff Gordon, but Rich was, yeah.
They were, for all intents and purposes, they were the Jeff and Dale of midget racing.
Yeah.
They really were, because
Yeah.
Rich was, the grizzled champion, and Jeff was the up-and-coming, youngster at the time.
Yeah.
That was the same rivalry that kind of carried over to Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
It was, and so the next morning, Bob's like, how are we going to handle this? But Rich is, like you said, Rich had been to Pocono and had qualified to make his first Cup start.
Yep.
So they put his car on the grid there, and we took a shot of it, and Bob gave a brief tribute to Rich. But then for Speed Week and for the next Thunder, Greg Oldham put together a tribute video that was, we were all sobbing watching it of Rich. But I'll tell you sort of a funny story of, because we knew Jeff well from Thunder and everything else, and Terry and Bickford are still good friends, and so Jeff was in Daytona in 1993, getting ready the morning of the Daytona 500. And he had allowed our camera crew to follow him from his condo to the track and all, just to sort of do a follow of the morning. But Jeff was sitting on the convertible waiting to go out for the parade lap. And Terry and I went up to Jeff, and Terry said, are you scared, Jeff? And Jeff's like, not really. And Terry's like, you raced with Rich Vogler. you have nothing to be afraid of. You know,
Right.
yeah. If you were man enough to go up against Rich Vogler,
Rapid Rich.
yeah,
Yep, the mad
you
dog.
you have nothing to fear, and I'll always remember that. And I remember sort of that look on Jeff's face of like, I did race Rich Vogler. You know, I did race against him, and you know, and I was on the production team that did the Unrivaled documentary about Jeff and Dale. And part of the things that didn't make the show, it's on the cutting room floor, was Bickford and Jeff talking about Vogler,
Really?
about how running against Rich prepared Jeff for what was to come. Because, I mean, as I said, I mean, if you want a picture of a race driver, just look at that picture of Vogler. I mean, you know, I mean, he's such a tough guy. So that was the joy.
He aggravated a lot of people.
Oh,
in his
I
career.
know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt
Oh,
about
yeah.
it. I mean, he, you know, I don't
I
know.
know guys personally that got into fisticuffs.
Oh,
with
I
him.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean, he was, you know, he was the Dale Earnhardt of the sprint and midget. I mean, people hated him, and they loved to hate him.
They had no problem moving you, and in a midget, that was not really, that was frowned upon.
Yeah.
Because it's open wheels.
Yeah,
but he would do it.
Yeah, he was that way. So, you know, that was part of, you know, the beauty of Thunder, is that people got to know who Rich Vogler was, and there were a lot of open wheel heroes that, you know, Vogler got to run in Indy 500s and all like that, but still there were people that only knew him from Thunder, and that was a good thing. And that's the way it was with a lot of the heroes that we had on Thunder.
Before we get going, we're getting to the end of the show, but before we do get going, did you ever think at any point that Thursday Night Thunder would have that big of an influence on the racing world, and not only that, but also launch the careers of, you know, some legends of the sport?
Yeah, you know, at the time, we just loved it for what it was. But now looking back on it, these many years later, it may have been the most influential series that the sport has ever seen.
I used to say I would call that era when Thursday Night Thunder ruled the world in auto racing.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, and we've talked a little bit about the roll call of people, but from Jeff Gordon and Steve Butler all the way up to Ryan Newman and Jason Leffler, Carl Edwards and Casey Kane, and I mean Tony Stewart. I mean, just
So much talent.
So much talent came through there, and all that Thunder did was shine a light on them. It shone the light on them, and we know that every Cup car owner would sit and watch just to see the talent on the show. And I remember one time we were at Terre Haute to do a Thunder from Terre Haute, and I look out on the roof, and the dirt is flying, and there's Roger Penske standing out on the roof at Terre Haute watching Ryan Newman race.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I mean, I'm like, that's the kind of audience. And when you went to IRP, you know, the IndyCar owners, the people that were standing up on the roof watching the races,
Right.
were a who's who of motorsports. And if they like work in the Cup races, the guys would say, "Oh, did you see that? Did you see this wreck? Did you see this
Right.
guy?" You know, and like I said, I'm so glad you had Mike Bliss on as a guest, because I remember no one could bury a car in turn 3 like Mike Bliss. I mean,
at IRP.
At IRP.
Yeah,
Oh,
he would take it down and just kind of like 4-wheel skated across the apex.
Yeah. I mean, when Bliss was out there, we were like, "Holy cow!"
Yeah.
You know. And so yeah, I never knew
The hammer, they called it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, but we had the Doug Colettas, and I mean, just like I said, I could go on and on and on, but I never knew that it would have the lasting long-term impact. But kind of now what's happening is most of those guys, you know, the series ended in 2002, and most of the young drivers today, they never watched Thunder.
I know.
They didn't know, but I think hopefully their dads, their moms, their brothers have told them stories about that series. But I really think, it changed the course of NASCAR history.
Absolutely.
Because without Thunder, we wouldn't have seen the guys like Gordon and Newman and Stewart and Edwards and all of them come down to racing cup, just like Stevie Reeves.
Right.
I mean, Stevie Reeves is racing midgets, and then, he makes the decision, I'm moving south. Here comes Robbie Stanley. He's going to move south. I mean, just that train of people.
And it wasn't the norm to hire an open wheel guy in NASCAR, and that Thunder changed that point of view.
Yeah.
It was like, look at these talented guys that can come out of this form of racing.
Yeah, I mean the talent they had, and also they had some media training. They had a microphone put in their face,
right.
and Dave Despain brought out their personality,
shy.
And so they were used to it. They would run to do an interview instead of running away. So,
well, Ken, we could sit here and talk for hours. We really can. I mean, there's so many different things we could bring up along the way. But we definitely want to have you back, because we want to have on some TV people along the way. We're going to have you on. We're going to have Jim Roller on eventually, and some other people who've produced or been on camera. But we want to thank you for coming in today.
It's been a real treat for me, Derek, and I love sharing these stories with you, because I know you can appreciate kind of where I came from, but also we can appreciate how fortunate we've been to have a career in telling the stories of our heroes.
It's really cool. It reminds me of a lot of being back in your office, sitting. So I'm feeling a little nostalgic, but we've got some cameras around us now. But it equally as fun.
Yeah. It's been a great treat for me. Thank you, Derek.
Ken Martin joins us on the Derek Pernesglio Show. We'll see you the next time. Bye.